All right, so on to tonight's topic and speaker. A recent poll by the Cato Institute found that 62% of 18 to 29-year-olds held a favorable view of socialism. A Gallup poll revealed that 39% of all adults hold a favorable view of socialism. We have a generational divide here. 54% of Americans overall have a positive view of capitalism, and that is the lowest recorded score since the measures began about 12 years ago. And if the polls are correct, tonight, the city of New York may elect a socialist mayor. Now, our question is this. If Americans appear open to socialism in ways that they never have before, at least in recent history, what can they learn from other countries' examples? And that brings us to tonight's speaker. Daniel Martino was born in 1999 in Venezuela, the same year that Hugo Chávez was sworn in as its president. Daniel witnessed changes that transformed his country, a once prosperous nation, into a poor and dangerous place. His family's income was drastically reduced due to inflation. Blackouts and water shortages increasingly plagued much of his life, and he was forced to line up for food and basic necessities for hours in line. In 2016, he left Venezuela to attend Indiana University. He then went on to pursue a PhD in economics at Columbia University in New York City. Today, he is actively engaged in discussing his experiences and contributing to the broader discussion about economic liberty in America and the world. So Daniel will speak for roughly 30 minutes. We will then open it up for Q&A. You'll see a microphone down here at the front on my right, your left. You will queue up. If you have a question, you will queue up behind that microphone to ask Daniel a question. Please keep your questions brief. Know that there are others who would like to ask them as well. Show good manners, and please do not monopolize the time during Q&A. So with that, please join me in welcoming Daniel Martino. Thank you.
All right.
How's it going?
Here. But I want to begin by telling you, while they set up the PowerPoint thing, about a country that is very different from the country I lived through. It is a country that used to be the fourth richest country in the world. It is a country that in the 1950s, not only was the fourth richest country in the world, but had more cars per capita than New York City, Caracas. It is the country that, in this boat in 1956, welcomed my grandfather, my mom's father, from northwestern Spain. My grandfather was welcomed into a Venezuela that really welcomed not just people from Spain or from any other specific country, but from Lebanon, from Syria, from Colombia, from Chile. It reminds me of the story of, I was in an Uber in Miami, and I love guessing people's accents in Spanish to see where they're from. And this man's accent I couldn't really place until he said, actually, I'm from Chile. And I was shocked because the Chileans have a very peculiar accent, okay? That is very hard to understand, and that's how you know they're Chilean. And he said, but I lived for 40 years in Venezuela. And that's why he lost his accent. And I was shocked, and he said, do you remember the floor of the, are there any Venezuelans here that you guys know? You guys, okay. Do you guys all remember the floor of the airport in Maiquetía? The art of Cruz Diez? That is a very characteristic thing from Venezuela. And he said, I was the engineer that worked on that project. I left Chile in the 1970s under Allende when Chile was being destroyed by its own socialist government. And then he lived 40 years in Venezuela. And then he had to leave Venezuela to go to the United States. And now he's an Uber driver in Miami, a dude who was an engineer, an accomplished professional in Venezuela. That is heartbreaking. And that is the story of so many people, like my own grandfather, who opened a parking garage despite having no high school education, and to save money to send remittances to his mom, who had 7 other kids in Spain, whose husband, by the way, had died in the Spanish Civil War. She remarried, thankfully, and had the other children. But my grandpa's the oldest. He sent money back home. He lived in the door that you see back there, inside the parking garage, to send half of his income to Spain. And I grew up in a good family, really. I was an only child, but in a different country. One with the same name, but without things in the shelves, where the rationing system changed over time. So sometimes, at the beginning at least, it's, oh, your favorite brand of yogurt disappeared. That's, oh, you know, that you can ignore that. Then, oh, there's no milk for several days in the grocery store. Oh, then you have to have a rationing system where the government tells you which day of the week you go to the grocery store based on your ID number. Or even better, my favorite one was when they had fingerprint scanning machines so that the cashier would tell you what you're allowed to buy. One time as a teenager, I spit on my thumb, and then I put it in the fingerprint scanner because I was so upset at the fact that I had to scan my fingerprint to get the government to tell me what I could buy. And in Venezuela, if it's famous for something, is that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the planet. Yet Venezuela has no gasoline. Cars line up for days to fill up their gas tanks. Sometimes people slept in the car. Sometimes people would get robbed in the car, right? Because Venezuela is a very dangerous country. That's another aspect of the Venezuelan socialist system that at least makes it worse than other socialist countries that weren't as dangerous. Cuba doesn't have as many, carjackings and crimes as Venezuela does. And if that wasn't enough, the shortages, by the way, blackouts and water shortages, we also had hyperinflation. Real hyperinflation, okay? Not the mini inflation we lived in the US in the last few years, which was pretty bad. This is the price of a movie ticket when I was 17 years old. A pack of cash. Imagine if it was $100 bills. That is what hyperinflation looks like. But this is why I don't quite understand why in economics classes today we still use the example of Weimar Germany in the 1920s. Econ professors need to get their work updated. I know it's a heavy job to say, oh, you need more recent examples, you need to update the book to a new edition, but you don't need to go back to 100 years ago to look at examples of hyperinflation. We have them right here in Venezuela. It's still happening. It's still hundreds % a year. It's not as bad as Weimar Germany now, but in 2019, it was the worst year, thousands, tens of thousands % a year. All of this, I brought this with me from Venezuela. You know that in the US, there's a limit that you can bring in cash without declaring of $10,000? So imagine when me bring in all that cash. Well, I didn't declare it because that wasn't worth $10,000. That was worth a couple bucks. The paper was worth more. And so I left. And my grandpa, the one that you saw earlier that came by that boat, he left in an airplane 60 years later. How sad that immigrants had to leave Venezuela. Imagine the millions of Colombians who left crossing the border back to Colombia, when Venezuela used to welcome the people who were fleeing from violence in Colombia. And it happened to so many people. Venezuela today is the largest refugee crisis in the world. There are nearly 9 million, there are nearly 9 million Venezuelans who have left our country, about a third of the population. And you might say, Daniel, how come so many people leave? That's really shocking, I would say. It is really shocking because there are other crises around the world that you might think merit more people fleeing. About 6 million Ukrainians net of return migration have left Ukraine, a country that is literally being invaded and bombed by a foreign nation. Syrians, about 6 million Syrians left their country. And Syrians, there were chemical weapons used in that war against them. Venezuela has no religious, no ethnic conflict happening, no civil war, no foreign invasion. What Venezuela does have, well, I guess they do have a foreign invasion, the Cubans, but that's a different thing. We'll talk about it. It's not really the Cuban people. It's always the regime. The Cubans are great. But what we did have was a political and economic system that destroyed a nation. More than any war has destroyed any other nation. Venezuela is the largest peacetime refugee crisis in human history. Meaning the largest flow of movement between countries' borders that has not been caused by a war. That is shocking. And by the way, few wars have been greater than Venezuela's refugee crisis. You can think of World War I, World War II, no wonder, right? the Bangladeshi War of Independence, because like 1 billion people live in South Asia, so obviously more people, flee. And so, why do they flee? Well, Venezuelans flee because the option of not fleeing is perhaps starving, is going through the garbage, like you see people. And you might say, Daniel, people go through the garbage in the United States. Yeah, homeless people with mental illnesses that are homeless. In Venezuela, it's college-educated people, like you. It's people who are married, who have homes, who have cars with families. It's people without any sort of mental condition, people with jobs, gainful employment. Because the average person might be making, what, $100 a month now in Venezuela? Thankfully, because 1/3 of the population of Venezuela has left, there are remittances going into the country, and that's why more people haven't left Venezuela. And so today you will hear many things about Venezuela. You will think, people will try to justify what happened as saying, no, Daniel, this is not about socialism, this is about corruption. It is a corrupt government. Sure, it is a very corrupt government. But most of the world is under a corrupt government. Do you think Vladimir Putin is not a corrupt president? Who thinks Vladimir Putin is not corrupt? We're going to get some fascist, whatever, pro-Putin person raising their hand. Okay, who thinks Xi Jinping is not a corrupt leader in China? Oh, wow. Okay. Who thinks that the governments in Latin America, Colombia, Mexico, African nations, do you think there are no other corrupt countries in the world? Why aren't there millions of people fleeing from other countries if they're so corrupt? Because you think you would have done socialism right? Well, Daniel, it's not corruption, it's that Venezuela is an oil-dependent country, right? So oil prices go down and people had to flee when the economy fell. To which I say, have you ever met a refugee from Dubai? When oil prices go down, do you see people fleeing the desert of Arabia in seeking better opportunities? Do people starve in Saudi Arabia? They can't even grow food in Saudi Arabia. At least the Venezuelans were eating the mangoes from the street. It's true. And they were very good mangoes. So it is not about oil dependence. If anything, if socialism was going to work in a country in the world, it's a country where the money literally comes from the ground. You get free money. Go do your socialist pet projects. And it was not enough. Okay, Daniel, it's not that. It's the evil United States government and the CIA that's sabotaging Venezuela. When we had blackouts, Maduro would blame Marco Rubio, back when he was senator, by the way. Not now that he's Secretary of State. Now imagine now that he's Secretary of State. They're really scared. Now the CIA is actually there, thankfully. But the point is, they would blame iguanas for the blackouts. Oh, an iguana ate a cable. We have iguanas here in Florida, okay? We're not having blackouts because of the iguanas. It's the right wing, they're sabotaging our electric supply. No, you know what happened to the electric supply? The government took it over. They gave electricity for nearly free. And then there was no money to invest in maintenance of the cables and the facilities. So they exploded. Just like the oil facilities. Why don't we have gasoline? Because the refineries exploded. 2 of them, for example, El Palito and Amoy, explosions. People died, the workers, because there was no investment. Why? Because there was no profit motive. And you just might say, Daniel, but this is just about Venezuela. The rest of the world, other socialist countries, this doesn't happen. It's happening in every single socialist country. Why do you think the Cubans flee to Florida? Why do you think the Soviets were trying to leave and the Eastern Europeans? They just forbid them from leaving. In Venezuela, when Chávez was coming to power, people used to say, no, Venezuela can never become like Cuba because Venezuela is not an island. Venezuela is a democracy. Venezuela has oil. And they were right about one thing. Venezuela is not an island, so people can walk. They don't need to build a boat. And that's why we had the largest refugee crisis. Because the Cubans just had a harder time fleeing, not because they didn't really want to leave. And what's important to understand about socialism, and let's get the words and the definitions right. Socialism is, according to the Marxist definition, government ownership or control over the means of production. the government simply, even if it was run by saints, which by the way, it is not. It is run by worse people than the average random person. Even if it was run by saints, in a democracy, what do politicians want? Power, re-election. How do you get re-election if you run a state company? You hire more workers because I'm going to create jobs. I mean, isn't that what they promise? They're going to build all these things and they're going to hire union jobs. Nobody gets fired. Imagine firing a government employee is much harder than firing a private employee. With revenue, why would you give things at the market price? No, food is a human right. If healthcare is a human right, food must be a human right. Food is more important than healthcare. Water, housing, clothing. I mean, you all wear clothing every day, I hope. But you don't go to the hospital every day. So what's more important? So clearly, it is not a right. But if it is, then all of these things must be rights, and the government's going to provide them for free. And so there is no incentive to actually run things well, just to give away things. A private business owner wants the opposite. They want to minimize their costs and maximize their revenue, maximize their profit. That's it. And if they're making losses, they have to shut down. If the government's making losses, you know what they do? They print money. You might say, Daniel, this is not the case. This is just a Venezuelan thing. This is in these countries. We are superior beings in our society. We're culturally superior. Our society is different, right? Socialism has been tried in every continent, in every culture, and I mean, how many languages? But if you think you're different, just look at socialist institutions in the United States. The government-run postal service loses $10 billion a year. All because of the human right to receive junk mail, right? Because this could have all been an email, let's be honest. It's true. We don't need a postal service run by the government. Most other developed countries privatized it. Look at the government trains. Amtrak loses billions of dollars a year. Because what do the politicians that run it want, the members of Congress? You have to create all these long-distance routes, and they're going to stop in my district, in this tiny town that doesn't actually need a station, so that you can create jobs in my town. Otherwise, I'm not giving you the approval for the funds. That's how Amtrak works. That's why Amtrak loses money. Unlike Brightline, by the way, that is here in Florida. I love Brightline. I took it myself a few times. The first privately built and run train, no government involvement in 100 years in the United States. Look at other things that the government runs. The VA. The VA doesn't work as well as private hospitals. We give the worst health care to the most deserving people. It would have been better if we had just given them money, given them private insurance to the veterans. Look at the only sub-society within the United States that lives under socialism. It's called the Indian reservations. The Indian reservations, you don't own your house, you cannot sell it, or people are limited from buying in. They have government hospitals, they have government schools, and guess how the Indians live? The highest drug addiction rates, the lowest life expectancy. Only the crooked leaders that make all the money from the gambling industry benefit. It's a very socialist society. Now imagine if the US government didn't just do this. Imagine if the US government owned Walmart, owned Bank of America, owned Chevron. Imagine if the US government owned all these things, which Venezuela did. The farms. Imagine if the government owned the farms. They always go for the farms first because the socialists are obsessed with agriculture because they're still living in 1917 as if they were Vladimir Lenin. And you go to the next one, it's not going. I don't know what's up. And I want to show you this example. Just two Latin American countries. This is the Economic Freedom Index of Venezuela versus Chile. In the 1970s, Chile was much less economically free. In fact, it was about as free as Venezuela was at the beginning of the Chávez years. It had hyperinflation, shortages, terrible economic system. Now Chile is one of the most economically free countries in the world. And by the way, it's the richest Latin American country, Chile. Chile has Starbucks, Chile has Walmart. People, by the way, there's no social security system in Chile. People save in forced 401ks. So they withhold your paycheck, put it in your own 401k, it's invested in the stock market, and it's your own money. It's full school choice, mandated by the Constitution, by the way. It's literally as if Milton Friedman wrote the Constitution. Really, his students did. And Chile succeeded. And Venezuela went the other way. And Venezuela became the poorest country in the world. Now, I want to debunk something else. When socialists talk about socialism in the US, they always try to lie to you and tell you, Daniel, we don't really want socialism like Venezuela. We want socialism like Denmark, like Norway, like Sweden, right? Well, that's a great thing if you want socialism like Norway and Sweden. Let me tell you some things about Norway and Sweden, and Denmark as well. This is a paper from the American Economic Review, the top econ journal in the profession. It's titled, Why is Europe More Equal Than the United States? I highly recommend you read this paper. It's mostly an accounting and descriptive paper, okay? What they find is that the United States has the most progressive tax and spending system in all of the developed world, meaning America's tax and spending system, including welfare transfers, healthcare, payroll, income taxes, sales taxes at the state level, everything, transfers a greater share of income from the richest to the poorest. The average tax rate paid by the bottom 20th to 40th to 50th percentile in the United States of the income distribution, the lower middle class, is about 15% of their income. The average tax rate paid by the top 1% in the United States, of all taxes combined, is about 33, 35% of their income. What is it in Eastern Europe? In Eastern Europe, it's actually slightly regressive. The poorer people, lower middle income people, pay more in taxes than the rich. In Western Europe, it's slightly progressive, with the rich paying a couple percentage points more of their income in taxes. But the middle class, the lower middle class, instead of paying 15% of their income in taxes, they pay nearly 30%. How? Well, almost every European country has a 20% sales tax. What's the sales tax here? 8-point-something%? Their payroll taxes, which is for the lower income people, by the way, there's a cap. Here it's under 200K, something like that in European countries as well. Their payroll taxes are at least 30% of your income. In Spain, where my mom lives, combined between employer and employee is 35% of your income, payroll taxes. And then there's a 20% sales tax. So just between payroll and sales taxes, half of your income goes to taxes. And then there's a progressive income tax system on top. There's corporate taxation. There's property taxes, other fees, excise taxes on alcohol, on gasoline, on cigarettes. That's how the poor pay more in taxes. So of course they can fund free healthcare. It's not free. The poor are paying for it. And you might say, Daniel, but they still live a better life, right? Do they? Okay, so I'm going to show you here. This is net household disposable income per worker, adjusted for cost of living. Net meaning after taxes and transfers. The closest country that gets to the United States in income levels per household is Belgium. The average Belgian household per worker, so the average Belgian worker makes 25% less than the average American worker. Oh, 25% isn't much. Well, think about if you earned 25% less, okay? Because this is adjusted for cost of living. You're not going to come and tell me, oh, the housing is cheaper there, whatever. No, this is adjusted for all of that. What about Norwegians? The average Norwegian is at the 62% level of Americans, so they make 38% less than the average American worker, the average Norwegian. And the Norwegians have an advantage. They're actually an oil state. They get free money from oil and a small population, so they should be making more than America, really. The Norwegians are starting at a big advantage. The Canadians, 43% less. Look at the Mexicans, 69% less. But honestly, not very different from the Slovakians, the Mexicans. So really, some parts of Europe are essentially Latin America in income levels. People don't quite understand it because when Americans go to Europe, they see all these beautiful buildings. That is all the capital stock accumulated from thousands more years of history that America doesn't have. But their income levels are meager. Try to be a young person your age in Europe and find a job. Good luck making 1,000 euros a month. Good luck making 2,000. I can assure you none of you would make over 3,000 euros a month. That's the reality. The average young person in Europe would be better off working at a McDonald's here. Now you might say, Daniel, but the Europeans work less, right? They get more vacations. You're right. If we adjust for the fact that they work fewer hours, not out of their own choice, but because they're forced by their own government to work fewer hours, they still make a lot less money per hour. And you might say, Daniel, okay, but that's the average person. This is all driven by the rich, right? We just have a lot of rich people in the United States. Actually, Sweden has more billionaires per capita than the United States. But forget Sweden. Among the bottom 20%, I don't know if you're, I don't want to get into too much math, but if you understand what the 20th percentile means, that is the income you have to make in order to make more money than just a fifth of the population. So that's solidly in the lower middle income of the population, okay? So 80% of the population makes more money than you if you're in this income level. In the US in 2022, that level was $30,000. That means that in 2022, 80% of Americans made more than $30,000 a year, okay? How much is that level in other European countries? This is also adjusted for cost of living differences. Well, Norway is the closest. It's essentially the same as the United States, the Norwegians, despite being an oil-rich nation. The only countries that are better than the United States for the poor in Europe are Switzerland and Luxembourg. Switzerland, which, by the way, is much more capitalistic than the United States. I think we should imitate Switzerland. Luxembourg, which is a financial capital, and they call it like a tax haven. Sure, let's become a tax haven. I'm all for that. What's the other closest nation? Denmark, where it's about $24,000 is the 20th percentile, which is 20% less than 30,000, okay? Then it's the Irish, then it's the Dutch. Where are the Norwegians and the Swedes? Well, there it is. The Finnish, the Belgians, the Swedish, they're all around $17,000 for the 20th percentile. And you might say, Daniel, okay, so clearly the Europeans make less money than we do. Clearly socialism destroyed Venezuela. It wasn't corruption, it wasn't sanctions, it wasn't the oil dependency. But what does that have to do with me? That's not going to happen in the United States, right? Well, the man who may become the next mayor, so you agree Venezuela's election protocol is good? You do. Okay, in Venezuela, ladies and gentlemen, the elections are rigged. Okay? If you say that the elections protocol in Venezuela is not so shabby, I take that as you want to rig the elections in the United States. Plain and simple. That is how I take it. That doesn't sound like a conspiracy to me. And you may say, Daniel, you're just making this up. Really? Put the next slide, please. That's his tweet. He didn't even delete it. You might think that, maybe they're like, if they're at least smart enough to delete it, right? Go to the next one. No, Daniel, they just really want to be like Denmark. They don't want to be like, Venezuela or Cuba or the USSR or North Korea. Well, then he said in a video call, the video's everywhere. But then there are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS or whether it's the end goal of seizing the means of production. What did I tell you at the beginning socialism was? Government ownership or control over the means of production. You may say, well, Daniel, that's just him, right? The Democratic Socialists of America sent a delegation to Venezuela to meet with the dictator of Venezuela. This is from 2021. They published it on their own social media. That's why they're wearing masks. Not because they're disgusted of each other, I wish. Now think about this. These are American citizens traveling to a country where there's a dictator killing and torturing people. I have a friend that's been in jail for over a year for the crime of witnessing the election, okay? Maria Lopez is her name. She's 31 years old now. She's in the largest torture center in Latin America. This is the same regime that, by the way, last week they tried to strip me of my Venezuelan citizenship. They're going to the Supreme Court, they're doing a whole fuss, they can do whatever the heck they want, I don't care. But this is who these people go and meet with. They don't want to turn us into any European country. And you might say, Daniel, okay, why do you put a picture of the Palestinian encampments? Well, this is in Colombia, where I'm finishing my PhD. Half of the people arrested at this encampment were not Colombia affiliates, okay? I'm going to tell you who organized it and who was arrested at this encampment. It's this man here who's arrested. His name is Manolo de los Santos. He runs a nonprofit in New York City, funded by the Chinese, called the People's Forum. He is personal friends with Díaz-Canel, the dictator of Cuba, and he goes to Cuba to meet with the dictator of Cuba. He also went last year to Venezuela to celebrate the election that was rigged. I knew of these people because actually a few years ago they brought some people who worked for the Venezuelan regime to New York City, and I organized a group of Venezuelan immigrants to protest against them. So I knew of them. So you might say, Daniel, what does it have to do with Palestine? Nothing. That's the point. It's not about Palestine. It's not about BLM. It's not about whatever issue is happening. It is about the destruction of the Western world. It is about the destruction of the United States. It is because these authoritarian regimes abroad, they know they cannot invade America because they would immediately get crushed. But they understand that America is a democracy. And so they try to what? Interfere in social media, to interfere in elections. The Russians do this. They buy bots to stir up problems on social media. The Chinese do this with the algorithm on TikTok. They do this by funding nonprofits like this. The Venezuelan regime and Cuba send spies. The FBI, a couple years ago, under the Biden administration, arrested a US ambassador of 4 decades who was a paid agent of Fidel Castro and Raul Castro. These things are happening. They understand, and by the way, think about it. If you were the dictator of that foreign country, this is a very cost-effective way to destroy your enemy. You're not losing a single life. You just put some money and then you let them destroy themselves. That has a good side and a bad side. The good side is that they really kind of fight us, right? That it's really we are in control. The bad side is that it's one thing for somebody else to take your liberty away. A much worse thing is for you to give it away voluntarily. That's very sad. And I care about this. I care about this very much because I lived it. I care about this very much because when I was a kid and I was visiting here, in Florida, by the way, I asked my mom to take a picture in the Walmart aisle, like that one. I was much thinner too, as you can notice. And I did it to send that picture to my friends. Because look what is available here. Waited until nobody was in the hallway because I was a little ashamed of it. You know, I didn't want the Americans to see me taking a picture with food that's like really weird. But it is not weird. It is special. We just take it for granted. We take for granted that we have lights, that we have water, that we have food. We don't understand that the reason we have all these things is because of the profit motive. It's because of capitalism. It's because the farmer wants to make money, the grocery store wants to make money, and you give them your money to get food in return. And we have an amazing system, the richest country in the world, not a perfect country. Okay? There's a lot of issues that I want to fix. But I can assure you that the way to fix them is not to take over people's businesses. It's not to have insanely high tax rates. It's to do good policies, okay? There's many things that we can do. Housing crisis is really bad. Why don't we let people build housing? Talk about socialism. We have a system in this country where you need the government to approve where you can build a grocery store. That's called, that's part of zoning. And I'm not sure if you're a NIMBY or whatever, I'm very much pro, private property and building. But this is all government cost. So many of our issues are government cost. And so, the next time somebody tells you, oh, Daniel, what happened, in Venezuela, that can't happen here, right? Tell them that, socialism will never come to America by force. It will never come to America by bullets. It will never come to America because there's a coup. If it ever comes to America, it's because it is democratic socialism. And the only difference is the way they come to power. But it is no difference the way they leave power, which is never democratically. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, let's do Q&A. We have 15 minutes. Let's do this.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, are you ashamed of the fact that you're trying to manufacture consent to invade your own homeland and kill many people while hiding behind the facade of civil ideological discussion and critique?
Am I ashamed that I am manufacturing consent to invade? No, I don't want to invade, but I would support absolutely U.S. military action to depose Maduro, and I am very happy about the fact that I support that openly on TV. You can look up my videos.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
All right, so to kind of build on that question, you've talked about this group on your Twitter a lot called the Cartel of Sons, and this is being used to justify those U.S. airstrikes. So I've been reading, and I'm just wondering what evidence you have for this, because journalists and independent researchers cannot agree that this cartel exists in any
which journalists or
tangible
independent researchers?
way. True, no, there is
Have you read the Department of Justice indictment?
Right, the Department of Justice, which has a vested interest in
What's the vested interest?
in undermining Venezuela.
Yeah, what's
You
it?
don't think that that's a vested interest that they have?
Who? Who?
The U.S. Department of Justice and just the U.S.
Which
government
specifically?
in general.
Those are people. Which people? I can tell you,
US
okay, I'm going to
imperial
give you
machine?
what the indictment, okay? The indictment was done by the Southern District of New York.
Right.
Okay, which is independent. It's so independent that they quit when Trump took out the indictment of Eric Adams, okay? Actually, the Manhattan Institute hired the Southern District of New York employees that left because they were upset with Trump at taking the indictment out of Eric Adams out of integrity, because these are people in the Southern District of New York, career people who are adamant about enforcing the law, about attacking narco-traffickers, international criminals. I went, by the way, myself, to one of the audiences of El Pollo Carvajal, Hugo Carvajal. They call him the chicken, El Pollo. He's a general, okay? Yep. A general drug trafficker who, by the way, is now providing information like all of them. How do you think we have all this information? The Maduro regime people themselves are giving us the information. The nephews of Nicolas Maduro themselves were imprisoned in New York City because they were caught with kilos upon kilos of cocaine in Haiti. The only reason they're not here is because we have a horrible Biden administration 4 years ago that released them, okay? They even released Alex Saab, another crook who's not even Venezuelan. He's Lebanese Colombian who robbed so much money and all the things you can imagine. And in the pardon, you know what Biden included in the pardon? That you can't do a Netflix documentary over your story. Really. I mean, think about it. So the point is, these are real indictments. They really do traffic drugs. This is how they make money. This is why Maduro wants to stay in power, because they can continue making money from the drugs. I'll let you do one more follow-up, and then we'll stop.
Yeah. So you're asserting that all of this is a valid reason to invade a country full of innocent people and bomb it
I already said I
potentially
don't want to
and
invade.
accelerate. Right. So you don't want to invade, but that's what you've been saying. You've been on your Twitter.
I support
you've been
U.S.
supporting
military strikes on the Maduro regime.
And
yes.
so that's not the same thing.
No, I don't want thousands of U.S. troops on the ground. That would be too costly.
Oh, so it's about the cost, not about the human lives?
I mean, that's part of the cost. But actually, I'm not worried about the civilians. The real concern here is how can we liberate Venezuela so it is a free and prosperous country again? I think the Trump administration is doing amazing at striking the drug boats in the Caribbean. I support the military deployment, and I hope he goes further, to be honest. That is my honest and open opinion.
Despite the fact that we're less prosperous after Trump has come into office and that inflation and grocery prices are
that's
continuing
unrelated.
to grow.
If you want to ask about that, I'm happy to, but you can go to the other line. Yeah.
Hi, you made a tweet repeating the claim that Hugo Chávez ordered his people to hand suitcases of cash to BLM in brackets but the only source for that claim
Yes.
is an opinion article citing the Heritage Foundation, which added the word BLM in brackets with no primary evidence, and Hugo Chávez died before the BLM network was even formed in 2013.
So,
Why did
no.
you circulate an edited, unverified quote to attack a U.S. movement, and will you retract it given the lack of evidence?
No, first, I know who wrote this and who has all the evidence. He's a friend of mine, Mike Gonzalez, who happens to work at the Heritage Foundation, but I've known for many years. So I'll explain to you what happened. Have you seen the picture of Maduro with the BLM founders in 2015?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so you agree that the
You didn't say
dictator
Maduro,
of a
so
foreign country came to New York City and posed for pictures with the leaders of Black Lives Matter?
Okay.
Okay.
You said Hugo Chavez. You didn't say Maduro.
No,
Hugo
wait.
Chavez
I just want to
died in
establish
2013.
connection between the regime and Maduro and BLM. Now that we've established the connection, what the evidence has found, because people who worked for the Chavez regime said themselves, not me, they said that Chavez in 2012 ordered them to use this money to help BLM. That is the claim that people who worked for Chavez said. And if you want to say that that's false, you have to talk to them. I happen to believe it.
The BLM network was founded in 2013, not 2012. It didn't exist yet.
Oh,
And
so they
Hugo
weren't,
Chavez
oh, of course,
died
they were
before
not
it was
talking
founded.
about it. They immediately founded it without having conversations or fundraising money before.
All right.
That's
Hugo
how
Chavez
nonprofits
rose to
begin.
Good evening. My name is Gary. I'm a law student here. I'm writing a paper on Venezuela's 2024 presidential election, both the history of how Maduro was able to rig the election, and then what steps you can take in the future to secure Venezuela's democracy. Besides getting rid of Maduro, what steps do you think should be taken from a legal standpoint to secure Venezuela's future?
Well, legality doesn't matter in Venezuela. It's like the people when they're like, oh, the Constitution says this. They wrote the Constitution doesn't matter in Venezuela. They're thugs. In fact, they're not even bothering at cheating in the elections. At the beginning, it was, oh, dead people vote. We're going to force you to vote this way. Now they don't even bother. They just let you vote, and then they just make up the result. Which, to be honest, I don't understand why they took so long to do it.
So then maybe not a legal standpoint, but from a policy standpoint, how do you fix the CNE and how do you secure democracy in Venezuela?
Look, I think the only way is for this is a more economic point of view, but the cost needs to be greater than the benefit of remaining in power. And as long as they can keep making money from drug trafficking, which, by the way, they will continue making money from drug trafficking no matter what we do, because it's very difficult to stop drug trafficking, then they will continue in power. So the only way is threatening their lives. That's my opinion. That's what I think. Yeah.
Okay. Could I ask a
No.
follow-up?
Let me go next because then we'll run out of time.
Hey, good evening, Daniel. Sorry, we got a few things in common, and we're both raised Catholic, from what I can tell.
Yes, I'm Catholic.
And I think we both probably dislike Maduro and Chavez, so there's some common ground. But what I'm troubled by is your defense of the Trump administration bombing what they call terrorist or drug boats in the Caribbean. It sounds a lot like what Venezuela has done in the past. The dictators of Venezuela, they had the Operation Liberate and Protect the People, where whoever they designate a terrorist, they could kill them. And I don't see what the difference is, so it's a bit of a two-part question. What's the difference between what Trump is doing and what Maduro and Chavez did?
Yes,
And
I'll tell you
secondly,
that-
as
yeah.
a Catholic, how does that fit into the Catholic Catechism of just war?
Yes. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's a very valid question and very good. So I'll say one thing. First, the main difference is that these are actual drug trafficker terrorists, and the people that Maduro killed were innocent people. Now, if you say, well, you cannot guarantee that, that's a different argument. That's an argument of like power can be abused. I understand power can be abused. Unfortunately, that's the power that has been given to the president under the current system. And if the argument you're making is an argument against presidential use of war powers in general, right? Including bombing in the Middle East, including the operations perhaps against Osama bin Laden, who was killed as well. I mean, it's not like we brought him for a trial, right? And I think it was a right decision. So I think it's a big difference. Maduro is not killing people who are committing, horrible crimes, who work for terrorists, right? Maduro is killing normal, good people. And on the just war theory, this is how I view it. there are conflicting opinions on the death penalty in the Catholic Church. Is that what you're referring to, or you just want to talk about just war in general?
Oh, I just meant specifically the items in the just war doctrine that says that it needs to be proportional, that you need to not involve non-combatants, those kind of things.
Okay, well, what I would say is liberating Venezuela is a very worthy goal. Combating the scourge of drug trafficking that does kill, not just in the United States, but around the world. It's not even about the killing, it's about the destruction of lives that are killed too and are entering into addiction. And from economics, we know if supply goes down, price goes up. And that's what happens with drug trafficking when you increase the costs. Now, you might say, Daniel, that is a non-proportional, we should still board the boats instead of, bombing them. And I think that, I mean, as much as I would support boarding the boats, the problem is the cost of doing so is very, very high, and it's very difficult. The boats are really fast. So that's what I would say. I do support it, and I understand that there are concerns over abuse of power in different situations. I happen to believe that in these cases, there has been no abuse of power.
Thank you. I'll let the others go. You made my point.
I'd like to first say I'm sorry for what you and your family suffered in Venezuela. But I'd like to ask you, do you think that what enables any economic system to become rampant and operate by fiat is concentration of power in the executive branch? That first in 2004, Chávez took control of the Supreme Court, attacked the lower courts, imprisoned judges, and denied broadcast licenses to opposition television stations before most of the seizures of any industries.
No, the seizures of industries began right in the 2000, 2001, actually. They began
The
before
oil
any
industry,
sort of
but the
censorship.
cement industry was not until after.
The cement industry, you mean specifically?
Multiple manufacturing industries were not until after.
I can assure you that the beginning of nationalizations was in 2000, 2001. It began with agriculture. I mean, nationalizations were the core of the Chávez economic policy. But what is the point you're trying to make?
The point I'm trying to make is that what enabled him to do it was a
concentration.
unitary executive philosophy that enabled him.
Oh, well, unitary executive is a different philosophy from what Chávez did.
It was concentrating power in the executive branch and
but
stripping it
from
from
the American
judiciary.
judicial theory of unitary executive. Because unitary executive does not mean you can fire judges, okay? Or kill them, or arrest them, or deny broadcast licenses. If what you're trying to say, and I understand where you're getting, you're trying to say, oh, Trump is doing all these things. He's not. Which company has lost its broadcast license? Which judge has gone to prison? Which property has been taken?
The FCC threatened ABC's broadcast license.
Can you watch ABC right now? Yes. I mean, President Trump criticizes the media. That's true. Like many presidents around the world. He is not a dictator. And I think people need to really calm down with those things. If he were to actually pull the broadcast license, actually do that, I would be opposed. And I can put myself on the record on that. I would be opposed. I would be opposed to imprisoning judges, unless they were actually like they killed someone, there are reasons somebody could be imprisoned, but nothing like Venezuela. So I am against the concentration of power in the executive. I believe in federalism. I believe that the presidency has too much power in the United States. I agree. And we need Congress to take back its role. I think we can find common ground on that.
Okay.
We have time for one more question.
Hello, I'm Trip Russell. I'm an economics student, and I'd just like to apologize for some of my more misguided colleagues. I don't think they quite fully understand exactly the dangers of socialism. So I'd like to thank you for the education there. But as an economics student, I'd just like to ask, what sort of tangible, real-world steps can we take to make sure, just like in Venezuela, that the cost of implementing socialism and staying in power...
Let me tell you first a story, because you mentioned your classmates. I want to tell you about a woman that I met in 2019 at the White House. Her name is Shirley Avila de Leon. She lives here in Florida. She's a Cuban. Shirley was a communist who lived in Cuba. She became the president of her commune. And one day, serially, maybe I think must have been more because he was turning 19, maybe like 10 years ago, something like that, she complained that there was no water in her community. The Communist Party of Cuba sent some thugs with access and chopped off her arm and her leg. Shirley was able to be flown in a humanitarian flight to Miami, and they saved her leg. She can't walk well, but she lost her arm. Shirley is not a communist anymore. I think this is a valuable lesson for a lot of people. Just like the lesson of this video I watched of a woman in Venezuela, an old lady. She was crying on the eve of election night. She said, "It is my fault what happened here because I voted for Chávez. And now my grandchildren had to leave my country, and I belonged to a movement of trash." And you know what? I forgive her. I would forgive anyone who says sorry because I'm a Christian. But you know what? It's too late. So that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you.
Do you want to do more? Do you want to do more questions? Is that what do you want to say? Sorry?
Did you want another question?
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was.
Yeah, sorry, he wants to say something. Let him say what he wants to say.
Sure, I can be quick. I teach critical thinking. I often use straw man arguments in my teaching to make sure that students can unpack and detangle what's right and what's wrong. And I have to say, this is not really a question, but I had a question I was going to ask, but we're out of time, that the biggest straw man here is that the government of Venezuela is a socialist government. If you Google Venezuela and government, you will see that it's an authoritarian dictatorship. Every responsible source, even Wikipedia, says that it's an authoritarian dictatorship. We can agree on the role of authoritarians and how bad it is and how it affects people. I agree with you on Maduro. I agree with you on Chavez.
Okay.
But you're arguing that this is socialism that's responsible, and it's not, because there's nothing socialist about the government of Venezuela.
I thought that I had already explained this, so I don't understand why I have to restate it. So, and by the way, if you know what a straw man argument is to take it to the ridicule. I don't think I did. I took them literally. The Venezuelan streets and walls are literally paper with red hearts that says, "Made in Socialism." So if anything, I'm not the liar. Maybe they're liars. Maybe you're saying that Maduro and Chavez are actually misusing the word socialism. I disagree, because I define socialism very clearly as government ownership and control over the means of production. The Venezuelan government took over the means of production. They took over the means of, socialism is a spectrum where on one end you have North Korea and on the other end you have places like Switzerland and Singapore. And Venezuela is closer to North Korea than it is to Singapore. And I want to get much closer to Switzerland and Singapore and as far away as possible from North Korea. Okay. We have to. Sorry, but we can talk after.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. We're sorry that we weren't able to get to your last question, but we do have to be careful with people's times. Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed what you saw here tonight, please check us out, igc.fsu.edu. This video will be available tomorrow on YouTube for those of you who are interested. Otherwise, have a good night, and thank you again for being here.